Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Creation and Earth History Museum. My name is Jason Payne. I'm the director of the museum here. We're glad that you could join us tonight for this discussion between life's origins. We have some great speakers up here, some great credentials. Bill Morgan and Andrew Bohonic. We're really excited to have them tonight, and we're glad that you can join us for this friendly discussion and this debate. So with that, I also want to let you know we have the bookstore. If you guys like what you hear tonight, we have the bookstore open. That's going to be open until 9 o'clock. The museum will also be open, so you can go through there and check that out. And we're open every Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So if you don't make it through tonight, come back and check it out. With that, let's get it started. I'm going to bring up Joel Emilio. He's the moderator for tonight's debate, and he's an attorney, and he works in the health insurance industry. And he's going to be giving you a little more explanation about tonight and how the debate forum will proceed. So let's bring up Joel Emilio.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. How are you all doing tonight? Let me first introduce the speakers that we have. This is a creation versus evolution debate, and the first speaker who's going to take the position for creation is going to be Bill Morgan. He is a mechanical engineer. He has been a design engineer for the Navy for 28 years now. He has helped design nuclear submarines, battleships, aircraft carriers, and many other vessels. Andy Bohonic is going to take the position for evolution. He is a professor at San Diego State University. He's also the undergraduate advisor for the students in biology and microbiology, who have those kinds of majors. He has a PhD in Cornell and grew up in Pennsylvania. So with that said, let's talk about a few ground rules here. I'm going to make a prediction about every one of you. Every one of you has a position on this right here. So, and me included. So we all come into this with our own understanding or our own belief system. But for right now, let's talk about how the format's going to work. Bill Morgan is going to go first. He is going to give a 12-minute introduction, and then Andy is going to follow with a 12-minute introduction. Both of them are going to have 5 minutes to rebut each other's introduction. There are going to be 2 different subject matter that they're going to have 5 minutes each to talk about. One is irreducible complexity. And let me explain what that is. That was actually originally articulated by Dr. Michael Behe. He describes it as a single system which is composed of several interacting parts that contribute to the basic function and where the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. All right? The next one after that is natural selection and mutation. They're going to talk 5 minutes on that. They are both going to ask each other 2 questions each. They're going to take 2 minutes for that, and then they will both have 2-minute answers. After the questions, we are going to have a 5-minute break where my friend Bob here in the front is going to be helping me collect questions and answers from the audience. If you have a question for Bill, please write it on the yellow card. If you have a question for Andy, please write it on the blue card. All right, and after that point in time that we finish the questions and answers, which are going to last approximately about 10 minutes, we might go over a little bit. We're going to have 2 conclusions. Bill is going to talk for 5 minutes to conclude, and Andy will talk for 5 minutes to conclude as well. So with that, am I missing anything here? Sounds good. All right. With that, I'm going to introduce Bill Morgan to the podium.
Okay, good evening. My name is Bill Morgan. I'm really glad to be here. Andy and I already bonded on our love for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Not too many people love them. Quick point, I'm a creationist. I have no idea about my opponent's position, but I'd like to say just because someone believes in the theory of evolution does not mean they're an atheist. But I'll let Andy articulate his position, but I'm going to present the creation side. I want you to imagine you leave this debate today, you go home, you walk up your driveway, and you see snow. Would your best explanation be that the arrangement of stones is the result of chance, like somebody just tossed those stones? Or would your best explanation be this by design, like somebody carefully put one at each spot? You'd probably figure chance, but you'd never be sure because you were not there. So your position would be one based upon faith. Well, imagine you leave this debate today, you walk up your driveway, And you see this. You see 6 stones in a perfectly straight line. Now what would your best explanation be? If you would think design, that would make sense to me, but you wouldn't be certain because you were not there. So you have faith to believe those stones got in a straight line by design. Would you have faith if you believed it happened by chance? I would say yes. I would believe you have much, much more faith if you believe those stones got in a straight line by chance. So both sides require faith. You decide which position requires more faith. Imagine you leave the debate today and you see this on your driveway. 150 stones in a perfectly round circle. What would your best explanation be? If you think it got there by design, do you still have faith? Yes, because you were not there. Let's say you got about a 1/4 inch worth of faith. If you think somebody tossed 150 stones and they formed that by chance, I would think you'd have about 600,000 miles worth of faith. The point is, no matter what your position is on this debate, you require faith. You decide what has more faith. So decide for yourself, how complex do the stones have to get before you would conclude it's by design? Okay, quick definition, design is something planned for. Definition of chance is something not planned. That might come up later, but I got the definitions out of the way, so I'm happy. Guess how many miles of blood vessels are in the human body? Go ahead, shout it out.
D.
The answer is D. Humans have 60,000 miles of blood vessels. Blood vessels are pipe. I design pipes, part of my job as a living. Never do they get there by chance. Sometimes they might look like it, but no, they happen by design. I don't think anyone here tonight thinks the piping underneath their sink got there by chance. Gets there by design. I feel a 60,000 mile blood vessel system in you is the result of marvelous design. But you decide for yourself. Your blood vessels could circle the earth 2.5 times. Shaquille O'Neal's 3 times. Well, we won't get there. How many miles of DNA do you think are in the human body? 100 billion miles. DNA is information. Information does not arise by chance. It comes from intelligence, a code, a source giver. Oh, I don't like that. But 100 billion miles of information to me is a very, very strong argument for design. How long is 100 billion miles? Your DNA could reach the sun and back. How many people think that's amazing? How about 1,000 times? That's how much information is in your body. If you coil it up, it would fit on the sharp end of a needle. Now, do I have faith to believe 100 billion miles of DNA is the result of design? Yes, about that much. If I were to argue that happened by chance, I think it would be practically infinite. You know what these are? Red blood cells. Guess how many you make every second? The answer is 3 million. Everybody count to 1. You just made 3 million red blood cells during that time. I was once stuck in a traffic jam, sitting there waiting for traffic to move, looked at the person next to me, she's sitting there, and I said, wow, that person just made 3 million red blood cells. So creation can keep you busy during a traffic jam. This type of chemistry, to me, is beyond belief. I believe with very little faith, that's the result of design. Now, if something's designed, that means there's a what? Designer. And I think it takes very little faith to see design. Question for you. How complex would the human body have to be before you would conclude it's by design? That's just part of the human circulatory system. Never seen such great piping work in my life. Okay? Now, often people will say this, you cannot teach creation in schools because it's religious, the R word. This is what I think happens. Suppose this podium is creation. Some people paint it the color religion. Then they take a step away and they say, you can believe creation if you want, but we cannot teach it in the schools because it's what? Religious. What I think happens is they label it religion and then say, well, we can't teach it because it's religious. Well, my point is, this debate is not about whether creation is religious. The debate is what? Whether it's true. If people say, Bill, you must be religious, I am not religious. I'm a person that seeks truth. And my goal is that everyone seeks truth instead of hypotheses. Seek what is true. I believe creation is true. My life story real quick, I was born. And when I was 14 years old, my biology teacher, who I highly respected, taught me this. Now, I had gone to church my entire life. My biology teacher, Mr. Smedella was his name, he taught me as a fact, that's how he taught it, that humans have ape-like ancestors. As a 14-year-old, I said, wow, hey, if that's true, that contradicts the Bible, and the Bible is wrong about science on page 1. So I said to myself, why should I listen to this book if it's got science wrong on page 1? My story is for 12 years, I believed the theory of evolution was true, and I was an atheist. At the age of 26, I got a pamphlet handed to me that talked about the same thing. But the pamphlet I got talked about the actual fossils of each supposed transitional form. I studied the fossils, and at the age of 26, I felt angry that I had not been told what the evidence is. Quick question, what's that? Those are cartoon drawings. Those are drawings, it's not scientific. I wish my teacher in 9th grade would have told me what the fossils were. But at the age of 26, I finally heard the creation side, and at 26, I truly wanted to know what? True. I've dug into it. I feel every field of science supports creation. Which came first? How many think a chicken? How many think an egg? You're both wrong. You need 2 chickens. You need a male and a female. Don't you guys know anything about sex? I love for people to look into the details, dig into the details. In a G-rated manner, think of the details of sexual reproduction. You need a male and a female. Suppose the theory of evolution is true. By natural selection, mutations, and chance, you evolve a female. Well, you better evolve a male at the same time. Suppose the female is evolved and goes up to the male and says, mutate faster, dummy, we're going to be dead in a couple years. But some animals live only a week that use sexual reproduction. They don't have millions of years. So you need a functioning male and a functioning female. For the reproductive system to work, they need a muscular system that works. Digestive, respiratory, nervous, immune, circulatory, skeletal. You follow me? I don't see how you can get there by a step-by-step evolutionary process. With no shame whatsoever, I believe in the Garden of Eden teaching. People might say, oh man. I believe there's a supernatural, powerful God who made males, made females, same time, same place, with muscular, skeletal, immune, and nervous systems, proper temperature, proper food, proper amount of oxygen. Does that take faith? Yes, it takes faith. Does it take faith to believe reproductive systems happen by chance? Lungs, livers, kidneys, spleens, the sun, the gravity, the temperature, the oxygen. You decide what requires more faith, but I think both sides require faith. Okay, the most important part of science is observation. There are steps to science. The first step is you start with an idea. Suppose I had an idea that this pen could fly. Would you believe me? You might request something. Evidence. I dropped the pen 1,000,000 times, it never flies. Should you believe my idea? No. Conclusions should be based on observation. I have many evolutionist friends. I talk to them. I learn from them. But I'm convinced they have an idea, they have a conclusion, but they don't have the evidence. That's how you should reach conclusions. Science fact, the universe has a lot of matter and energy. Science question, how did matter and energy originate? What is your best explanation? I wasn't there, nobody else was, so what is your best what? Explanation. The first law of thermodynamics teaches matter and energy is neither created nor destroyed. This is not a religious belief, it's a law of science. The universe did not have a natural origin according to a law of science. The second law of thermodynamics teaches the universe is not eternal. There's 4 possibilities of how we got this universe. Some people think it's eternal. You can believe that if you want, but it's falsified by the second law of thermodynamics. Some people think the universe had a beginning and it was a natural beginning. Many atheist people believe that. That's falsified by the first law of thermodynamics. I believe the universe did have a beginning and it was a supernatural beginning. That is supported by the laws of thermodynamics. Some people think the universe is an illusion. Anybody ever met people like this? Ask them for their money. See if that's an illusion. They won't give it to you. An author of a thermodynamics textbook teaches the second law is a description of the prior and continuing work of a creator. This is the author of a thermodynamics textbook. It's not a religious belief. I believe it to be a true belief. Two laws of science teaches the universe did not arise from natural processes. You can believe anything you want. It's a free country. But if you think matter and energy originated by natural means, don't what? Don't call it scientific. It's anti-scientific. There's a lot of living things on Earth. Science question. How did life originate? What is your best explanation? Oh, 1 minute. Time flies. The law of biogenesis teaches life only comes from life. A law of science tells us life did not arise by natural processes. You can think life came from non-life, but don't call it scientific. The first life, if it did happen by chance, would have to be able to reproduce, metabolize, and then mutate without dying. Have you thought of those miracles? I don't have enough faith to think that happened by chance. Evolutionists believe all life has bacterial ancestors. I'm going to really have to speed it up. If you think the theory of evolution is true, forget about the ape men. You think you have bacterial ancestors. If you think creation is true, you think bacteria can only make what? Bacteria. And people make people. I feel people make people, bacteria makes bacteria is supported by genetics, biochemistry, taxonomy, everything we observe. You are proof for creation. You all have human parents. Science question, do you really think you have bacterial ancestors? Okay, I got to go fast real quick. Do you believe in evolution? Yes, no. What do you mean by evolution? You sure your clock's right? The word evolution means change. Do you believe in change? Yes. People are getting taller, but they're still people. These two folks are sons and daughters of the same parents. Creationists believe in all kinds of variation and potential of change. That's microevolution. Microevolution is true variation within a kind. Macroevolution is the belief you have bacterial ancestors. So, questions for Dr. Bohanec. Do you believe blood vessels, 60,000 miles of blood vessels is design or chance? How did matter and energy originate? What's your best explanation? How did life originate? And do you really think humans have bacterial ancestors? Okay. Ten minutes.
Well, thank you all for coming. So, yes, I'm an evolutionary biologist. I study many aspects of biology, including evolution, and the specific area that I focus on is actually what Bill was referring to as microevolution. That's variation within species and all the evolutionary processes that shape it. So, first, yes, let's come up with a definition for evolution. So evolution is a change in time in a population or species with a genetic basis. So it's not change within a lifetime, it's change from generation to generation, and we say genetic basis because there are changes such as people living longer or getting taller over many, many generations, which could be entirely due to environmental causes like better nutrition and better medicine. So we only study within evolutionary biology those changes that have a genetic basis. This distinction between microevolution and macroevolution, again, evolution within species and macroevolution being evolution in higher categories, most modern evolutionary biologists believe this distinction to be largely artificial. There are a lot of gray areas in between. There's no clear set of processes that draw that line between those two categories. And the other thing is, we'll discuss later, natural selection is an important evolutionary force, especially for all of the traits that we look at and think about when we wonder at how well the creation of life seems to be fit with its environment, but is definitely not the only evolutionary force, and so we study all of them. Now, I'm Catholic. I'm not an atheist, I'm Catholic. For me, there is no inherent conflict between evolution and religion, and this was codified by Pope John Paul II in a document in 1996 called Truth Cannot Contradict Truth. He said that even by 1950, his predecessor, the previous pope, had already stated that there is no opposition in the Catholic Church between evolution and the doctrine of faith, and that as we accumulate new knowledge, this has now led to the recognition that the theory of evolution is a full, complete theory. It's not simply a hypothesis. But, and here's the but, and this is from the Pope, theories of evolution which consider the spirit as emerging from the forces of living matter or as mere epiphenomenon of this matter are incompatible with the truth about man, nor are they able to ground the dignity of the person. What the Pope's talking about here is this concept that religion and science occupy separate, complementary domains of inquiry. The things that are explained by religion and the things that are explained by science are separate issues. And so religion deals with the existence of God, the soul, the afterlife, ethical and moral decisions. Science deals with explanations about natural phenomenon. And again, for me, and I will assert for the vast majority of people who study evolution and biology generally, this is the standard view. So I will go out on a limb and I'll say that we shouldn't go in the opposite direction and use science even to dispute whether or not God exists. Those are two separate sets of questions answered in different ways. This philosophy has been called by different scholars different things. Sometimes it's called the idea that there are separate domains for science and religion. Stephen Jay Gould called this non-overlapping magisteria, which is a lot of big syllables. For those of us who are religious, we subscribe to this idea of theistic evolution, or some people call it evolutionary creation. Religion is compatible with science in general, with the facts of evolutionary biology specifically. There are lots of things that can't be explained by science that have to do with the origin of life, issues, what is love? I mean, there's lots of room for God in this worldview. And this is not unusual. Many, perhaps most religious people worldwide do not reject evolution. The National Council of Churches as a teaching resource that recognizes there is no inherent conflict. The Roman Catholic Church, most Protestant religions, or most Protestant denominations, including many Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Unitarians, and so forth. Out of the 4 major denominations of American Judaism, 3 don't recognize a conflict between evolutionary biology and their faith. Many mainstream Sunni and Shia Muslims, some Hindus, many religions do not recognize this as being an inherent conflict. So, if we're going to think about our worldviews, and I appreciate we all have different worldviews, it's got to be one of these 3 things. These either occupy separate domains of inquiry, or there's some overlap between science and religion, or I suppose an extreme view down here would be that science is a subset of the things that we could explain with theology. And if you believe in this diagram in the middle, or perhaps the one on the right, that's fine, but there's not going to be anything I'm going to say here tonight that's going to convince you otherwise, right? That's faith. Faith is accepting without proof. And so this is really not, I don't think, a debate as much as it is a philosophical discussion. Within the scientific community, there's really no debate about evolutionary biology. So, Gallup polls show that within the United States, less than 0.15% of scientists who work in the areas of earth sciences and life sciences that are relevant for evolution believe in creation science or consider it a valid theory. So within the scientific community, this is really not an issue of debate. The other problem philosophically, and again, this is my personal feeling, if you start off with this idea that religion and science don't occupy separate conceptual spheres, then over time, as the body of knowledge for science grows, the things that religion used to be able to explain sort of get squeezed out. Somebody called this the God of the gaps problem, right? So as science explains more and more, the things that religion is used to explain become areas that just haven't been discovered yet. And again, for me personally, I find that far less satisfying than starting down here with the idea that the Bible is a divinely inspired document, but not literally true. Hopefully by the end of today, we'll hear from Bill, sort of his particular, view of creationism, because there are lots of different kinds of creationism. It's not a single, there's not like one creation book or website or document that we can look at. There are many, many views of how creationism, what it could mean in terms of the history of life. So in this diagram, although I don't really like the way this is drawn over here, for now we'll just leave it up there. That's, biological evolution. Time is at the bottom, going up to the present at the top. And all living life has common ancestors, and there have been extinctions among the way. And then these others represent different ways of thinking about special creation. So again, we could acknowledge that perhaps at the beginning God created species and then allowed, as Bill suggested, for microevolutionary processes. Or some creationists believe that God created kinds, something bigger than species, and allowed microevolution and some minor speciation after that point. There are some very strict creationists that actually deny microevolution and assume that everything has basically been exactly the same since the beginning of time. And then whether or not you allow for extinction. And then also there are some creationists who interpret the fossil record as meaning there have been several special episodes of creation throughout the history of time. And so hopefully we'll get Bill's perspective on this by the end of tonight. Before I quit, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about some major evolutionary principles, and then we have time throughout the rest of the evening to go through these in more detail. For us who work in this field, natural selection is about as complicated as one line of algebra. Heritable variation exists within species. So here is a Maine lobster. This is what they usually look like. And if you look long and hard enough, you find rare variants. You find blue lobsters. In extremely rare situations, you'll find something like this calico spotted lobster over here. And this is true for every trait we can look at. This is true when we look at the level of DNA. In almost every species, for almost every trait we look at, there is variation. Some of these variants are important. They affect survival or reproduction, and some of them don't. And for those that do affect survival and reproduction, some forms of these genes are going to be either overrepresented or underrepresented in the next generation. And for example, if this particular rare lobster happened to exist on a rocky bottom, it might actually blend in with that bottom a little bit better and avoid predation. I said this earlier, I'll say it again later. Natural selection is an important evolutionary force, but that's not the totality of evolutionary theory. It is one of many evolutionary forces, and there are situations, I don't think we'll have time to discuss them today, where natural selection is not even the most important evolutionary force. Speciation is a process. It's not an endpoint. There's no single species definition we can come up with that fits the diversity of life. And I'll mention this later, but even this idea that species cannot reproduce and produce fertile offspring, you can't use that for lots of plants. You can't use that for bacteria. If we look at the diversity of life, there is no single species definition that fits everything. There's nowhere in this continuum from microevolution to macroevolution where we can say, this is where we have a new species. Experts working in the fields on these different types of organisms make that call. And if we want to think at higher levels, evidence for transitions between complex traits, this is, the big question. Is there evidence for transitional forms? Do we find, trying to think of the example you used, do we find, half humans, half apes or something like that? Evidence for transitions between complex traits and between species is found in all sorts of places, and this ranges from developmental biology to, as I showed here, living variants, finding different forms of the same species, and extinct species as well. And so we'll go over some more examples of those later. And so that's my 12 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, well, we do agree on a lot of things. We both believe in God, and we both believe in microevolution. But I do think, I say politely, that he painted creation as religious and said they're separate. I didn't bring up anything about religious. I brought up laws of thermodynamics, the law of biogenesis, genetics, people make people, apes make apes, bacteria makes bacteria. Nothing religious at all about that. So that's what the debate's about. Not philosophy, not thought. It's about science and scientific evidence. I disagree on his 0.15%. I just read a Gallup poll, and I just printed 5,000 PhDs and professors who dissent from Darwinism. I believe the statistic is fallacious. It's 70% believe that there's some kind of designer, and I just read the Gallup poll from 2009, and here's a list of PhDs who believe that. I'm not going to hand it to you, I'll just put it there. But you can look at that afterwards. I don't accept that 0.15% because I did research that. He said, I'm starting with the divine. I was a creationist 2 years before I was a Christian. I believed creation was 100% true before I became a Christian. People say, oh, you got to believe that because you're a Christian. No, creation came to me first, the science, and then that. So starting with the divine is not true. He said there's many different kinds of creation. Well, there's also many different kinds of evolution. I'm assuming you believe in theistic evolution. I'm not going to debate your side, but you can present the evidence of which kind of evolution you believe in. Okay, many things we agree with. The founder effect, I accept this 100%. You could have a whole bunch of bees. The wind blows a couple away. They start their own colony. They can no longer interbreed. No problem with that. But was any new genetic information created? No, genetic information was lost. They are still what? Bees. Genetic drift, 100% true. By chance, a population can lose a trait. That is losing information. Creationists have no problem with that. Nothing new was created genetically. Information was lost. Speciation. Every creationist I know agrees it to be 100% true. You got 100,000 snails. You build a freeway between them. You separate the two populations. After a while, they can no longer interbreed. Does that happen? Yes, but they are still what? They are still snails. Okay. Now, evolutionists teach reptiles are the ancestors to birds. You decide for yourself. Earlier I said, dig into the details, okay? If reptiles are the ancestors to birds, here's some facts. You've seen a lot of reptiles. You've seen a lot of birds. You've seen a lot of birds, you've seen a lot of lizards. You ever seen a blizzard? Nope. I'm from Buffalo, I've seen those kind. Trust your eyes. If reptiles became birds, the front legs had to become what? Wings. Have you seen evidence for this? Think of the details. As a mechanical engineer, I can't even imagine the mechanics of a leg becoming a wing. That poor critter cannot catch any food. It can't run away from anyone. It's going to go stumbling through life for millions of years. And have you observed it? Is it the idea you believe or what you've observed? Tremendous mechanical difference and physical differences between an arm and a wing. The scales on the reptile had to become what? Feathers. Have you seen half a scale, half a feather, either in the fossil record or living? I propose you didn't. This is from electron microscope. Tremendous differences. I don't see how this happened by a step-by-step process, and there's zero evidence for this as well. The cold-blooded reptile had to become what? Warm-blooded. Where's the evidence for this? How did this happen? The respiration is completely different. Reptiles have a simple respiratory system like us. The air comes in, the air comes out. Birds have the most efficient respiratory system in the universe. They need it for what they do. They fly. How by a step-by-step process did that evolve? The hind feet had to become perching feet. Tremendous differences there. Beneficial mutations? No. I believe birds were designed as reptiles were. The solid bones had to become what? Hollow bones. How did this happen? Is there any scientific observable evidence for any of these changes? No. The brain had to change. Which animal on land has about the worst eyesight? Reptiles. Who's got the best eyesight? Birds. Is there any evidence of how this happened? If it did, I wear glasses. I'd like to see a few beneficial mutations for that. But once again, seek truth through the evidence. Don't just believe something because it's in the Bible. you can trust what you see in science and see that it complies with the Bible, and that's a strong foundation for my faith. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got 5 minutes. Bill mentioned a lot of things. I don't have time, obviously, to address all of them. I'll pick on just a few, and the others I think we'll go through in the later parts of the talk today. I'm glad we agree on this, that new species do evolve. And this, again, is not common to all creationists, so it is an important thing for everyone to realize. And we've observed them evolving in modern times. This is a particular grass that's been studied in Wales, and a population of this grass that sits next to a mine, growing on mine tailings from the 1800s, has evolved to basically incorporate, or I should say tolerate, the heavy metals from these mine tailings, and its flowering time has changed. It can no longer interbreed with the same previous grass species that lives in a nearby meadow. It's reproductively isolated. It occupies a different ecological niche. It has different physiological tolerances. And these hold up even if you take these two species and put them in a common garden. And so this is an example of a new species evolving in modern times. In the United States, this is the hawthorn fly, also called the apple maggot fly, because it evolved in North America to feed on hawthorns. And when apples, maybe you didn't know this, apples are not native to North America. They were introduced in the 1800s. When apples were introduced, a population of this fly evolved the capability of its larvae feeding on apples, where now it's a pest. And these are now two separate species. The apple flies are normally only found on apples. The hawthorn flies are only normally found on hawthorns. And scientists estimate from genetic studies that the amount of hybridization between these two is only about 4%. So new species do evolve, and we've seen it, and it happens. The second thing that's important to realize is this iconography. We've got the monkey, and then the ape, right, and then the human, and then the human with the microphone over here. This is not how evolution happens. So this is not your family tree, right? You didn't evolve from your father, from your grandfather, from your great-grandfather. That's not what patterns of ancestry are all about. This is your family tree. You share a common ancestor with your siblings and with your first cousins and with your second cousins. Fish did not evolve into salamanders, into cats, into you. That's not the way evolution works. You share common ancestors with these organisms. And so these common ancestors are what we should be thinking about evidence for. What would they look like? What would be evidence that, again, as Bill says, you would personally find convincing to believe that those existed? But it would not be feasible to think of this series at the top, this transitional series where every step between them has to exist. The common ancestor of two species, it might not be completely intermediate in form, and especially if you pick two completely separate things, like humans and bacteria, right? Closely related species, we're going to see similarities, but as you get more and more distant, you're not going to see a completely intermediate ancestor in form. So here's a great example. Here's our current president down here. Okay, some people can clap. And here is George Bush, and some more people can clap. And they are 11th cousins. So some budding, genealogist has figured out that they are 11th cousins. And so their common ancestor from the 1600s, I'm going to guess, didn't look intermediate between the two of them. That's just a guess. And probably didn't have intermediate political beliefs either. So what would reasonable expectation be for a transitional form? So, I think what we need to look for are transitional trait combinations, either in living organisms or in fossils. I mean, that's what we should be looking for. So I'll go through one, maybe two quick examples before I run out of time. Here's a flounder. It has two eyes on top of its head. And here's another fish, a pompano, which is reasonably closely related, and it has eyes where fish normally have eyes on either side of the head. And so you can ask, where are the transitional forms? All right. Here's a spiny turbot. A spiny turbot has one eye on the side, and then the second eye, it's almost at the top of the head. It's a living species that has this transitional form. And if we look in the fossil record, we find other fossil species. Now, the two eyes are orange and blue here. So over here on the left, again, here's your pompano. Here's an extinct species where one of these eyes has started migrating, and we can find evidence of that in the fossil record. And here's the next step in the transitional form. Here's your spiny turbot, and way over here are flounders and other flatfishes. I mean, what else do you want? That's it.
Thank you.
Sorry. It's still a fish. So, okay, that's the next point. If we're going to say they're all fish, and we're going to say that these things evolve in minor ways, and they just don't evolve into different kinds, then I think what we got to do is say, all right, well, what's a different kind in this order of biological organization? How different does it have to be? How many of these transitional series and over what biological range do we need to establish before it seems reasonable? And again, it depends on your worldview, on your faith. Again, I'll finish. Do your own research, as Bill says. There's a whole Wikipedia page that lists transitional fossils. And it's not like a page. It's like it scrolls on and on and on and on. There are examples of transitional fossils between all sorts of different groups. So the evidence is there, basically, is what I'm trying to say. That's it.
Don't start yet, okay? Okay, first, I think it's important to say that Bush and Obama are humans. I don't believe they have bacterial ancestors. But anyways, irreducible complexity, big, long, scary word. Basically means something like this. Suppose I built you a car, but I forgot the spark plugs. You going to drive home? No, your car needs 10,000 parts in order for it to work. One part doesn't work, you're not going anywhere. That's irreducible complexity, 10,000 parts. Now, let me ask you guys a question. Which organ in the body is the most important? Where you're being set up. No matter what you say, I got a different answer. You could say the brain, I'll say, what about the heart? You might say the lungs, well, what about the liver? The kidneys. They're all important. All of your systems need to be functional except reproductive, or you're in big trouble. Suppose you were laying here and you didn't have a liver. Are you going to mutate and get one? No. You need them all to be working instantly. You don't even have 5 minutes for one organ to lag behind another. That is irreducible complexity. They're all equally important. Your body is a deck of cards. You pull one card out, everything collapses. Your body is the same way. You've taken blood tests and you see the ranges of things like sodium and calcium, right? And you say, all right, I'm doing pretty good. Can you imagine the complexity of that for it to remain balanced? A house of cards, that's what we are. Irreducible complexity has to do with the house of cards. This is a part of your body that you would be dead without. I'll take one guess. Go ahead. Good guess. No? Oh, you're just copying him. No, I'm just teasing. It's your stomach. Did you know that your stomach produces hydrochloric acid? The pH is 1 or 2. It could eat steel. Why doesn't the acid in your stomach eat your own stomach? Because it's there for digestion. It helps enzymes digest meat. Your stomach is meat. Why don't you digest your own stomach? Because these cells produce mucus, like a toothpaste, to keep the acid off your own stomach. Irreducible complexity. Let me ask you this. Which evolved first? The cells that make the acid or the cells that make the mucus? Either one comes first before the other, you're dead. If you get the mucus first, you can't digest food. You get the acid first, you're going to digest your own stomach. I believe in instant creation. This is just one tiny example. I believe that God created both cells at the exact same time or else you'd be digesting your own stomach and no more In-N-Out Burger for you. There's so many. I just really, really love creation. The female egg does not come cruising down the fallopian tube saying, hey, bacteria, hey, virus, jump on board. Most people don't know this, but the female egg is protected by 3 barriers. It's like a castle with 3 walls around it. Nothing can penetrate these 3 walls. So how did we all get here, right? The sperm has 3 unique enzymes. Guess what each enzyme can do? Penetrate a different barrier in order to fertilize the egg. To me, this is irreducible complexity. What evolved first? The barriers on the female egg or the enzymes in the sperm? Follow me? I see this as irreducible complexity. The details never stop. The female egg has the ability to test the species of the sperm. If it's not a human species, it's like, get away from me, Willis. I'm not having anything to do with you. How does that information come about? To me, once again, irreducible complexity speaks of God. And I am very pleased. We both believe in God. We believe that there is microevolution. So we're bonding even more instead of the pirates. You evolved just 2 enzymes, none of us would be here today. And there's no end to the greatness of human reproduction. The circulatory system. I once sent a polite email to someone who talked about the evolution of the heart. I asked him what evolved first, the heart, the blood vessels, or the blood? He replied to me, they all appeared at once. I said, isn't that creation? He said, absolutely not. Look at the irreducible complexity of the blood. What evolved first, the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets? Which one is the most important? They're all important. Irreducible complexity, to me, talks about instant creation, which I think is great science and also biblical. Has anyone ever told you you have holes in your head? How many people have had that? You do. You have a lot more than you might know about. These are called foramen. How many people didn't know about these little holes all over your body? You've got them throughout your skull. The purpose of them, here's what they look like. Nerves and tiny little blood vessels pass through there, or else how are you going to get blood on the outside of your mouth and throughout your body? What evolved first, the tiny little holes or the nerve and the blood vessel to go through them? I believe in instant creation. This is threading a needle, and what's neat is people have foramen in different spots. But in every case, that needle gets thread. Once again, I see this as irreducible complexity and the greatness of God. Oh, we don't have time for that. Okay, time's up.
So I'm going to take this idea of irreducible complexity, I'm going to rephrase it the way we would think about it in evolutionary biology. Natural selection is usually assumed to, to operate incrementally. So step by step, if there is an evolutionary transition, each transition has to be more fit than the last. And the classic way to present this argument is if these intermediate steps are less functional or less fit, this is the problem, right? So how do you go from no eye to having this incredibly complex eye? What good is half an eye? It seems like a waste of time and energy, and it's just kind of messy, right? So there's lots of answers. I'm going to focus on 2. One, sometimes things that look like they're complex are not as complex as they seem. And here's a great example because it's another human example. You know, there are animals, not us, that walk on 4 legs, and there are humans and other animals that are bipedal and walk on 2 legs. This seems like an irreducibly complex problem because there are a lot of things that need to change, right? You've got to have your S-shaped spine. You've got to have the muscle attachments just right, the shape of the bones, the strength of the various muscles. This all has to change at once to go from 4 legs to 2 legs. Except there's this guy, his name's Sleeper. He was a German whale anatomist, and he wrote this paper about a goat that was born with only 2 legs. This goat was forced to be bipedal, and as it grew, it lived. It wasn't some weird mutant goat that lied there and died immediately after it was born, but it was forced to use only 2 legs, and it turns out that After it died, they dissected it, they looked at the bone structure, they looked at the muscle structure, and all these things that you associate with being bipedal, the shape of the bones, the S shape that you find in a bipedal spine, the length of these processes that come off the bone, and the way the muscles attach to them. All these things developed basically because of use throughout this goat's life to look much more like you would expect from a two-legged animal. So this transition from 4 legs to 2 legs is not irreducibly complex. It happened in a living goat. And there are other examples like this. I don't have time to go through a lot, but let me touch on some developments from this is great. Some developments from developmental biology. Flies, and again, if we're going to talk about kinds, I'm not sure whether flies and dragonflies are the same kind or different kinds, but we'll touch on that later. But flies have 2 wings. Dragonflies have 4 wings, right? So how difficult is it to evolve an extra pair of wings and to get all the extra muscles that are needed to run those wings and all the nerve attachments? Again, another problem that could be presented as irreducibly complex. So now that we know a lot more about developmental biology than we used to know, we've found that there are these genes called Hox genes that control segment development in flies and pretty much everything else. And as you go along the chromosome, there's going to be this set of Hox genes that controls development. It's all color-coded, by the way. When you look at the chromosomes under the microscope, it's beautiful. It's color-coded. Anyway, you can move along and you'll find different Hox genes that correspond to development in different body sections. And because Drosophila, that's the Drosophila are the Drosophila of biology, right? That's what we do all these studies on, genetically. When you get mutations in these genes, you get some crazy things. So here's a fly with 4 wings based on a few mutations in these Hox genes. It's not as if you have to have 50 different mutations, one associated with growing this wing and one for that wing and one for the nerves and one for the blood. You duplicate these body sections relatively simply. Here's a fly with legs on its head. Now that's a strange mutant. Again, you can get seemingly complex traits evolved in ways that are a lot simpler than you would think. And it's not just strange flies in the lab. A good friend of ours from graduate school found this spider with 2 heads living out in nature, and she took a picture of it and published a little paper, presumably from mutations in these Hox genes that can duplicate entire body segments. It's not irreducibly complex. Humans, you have these genes too. They're found in 4 clusters on 4 different chromosomes that control development in different parts of your body. Okay, so I've only got about a minute left. I'm going to go through this last part quickly. Let's talk about the eye again. First of all, there's not just one way to make an eye. There are lots of ways to make eyes, and these different ways of making eyes have evolved in many different organisms independently. Here's your eye. Here's a squid eye. So cephalopods, squids, octopuses, they also have a compound eye just like you do. Very, very similar. Except, actually, in your eye, the rod and cone cells face backwards. So for the light to get to them, it's got to go through all these layers of nerves and blood vessels and things. And then in the squid, actually, in my opinion, designed better because those rod and cone cells actually face forward. So 2 different designs. Again, maybe there's some reason why ours are specially designed to work very good in humans and those work better for cephalopods, but it just seems to me that evolution has a toolbox. You're evolving from a common ancestor, and sometimes things don't come out exactly the same. There are theoretical models for how you could develop an eye from no eye. You start off with basically some light-sensitive cells, then the skin, this starts invaginating, basically, forming this little cup, and you can analyze this optically. The optical resolution for each step in this transitional series is better than the last. Eventually, you get a lens and an iris, and you eventually arrive at this point over here where the focal length is optimal in terms of visual resolution. And you can say that's just a model, but here's the thing. If we look through a group of organisms like mollusks, we find all of these different stages represented in different mollusks. You can find them with just pigmented cells, primitive eyes, and you can find mollusks that just have these little tiny indentations that has a little bit better visual resolution. This is the equivalent of a pinhole camera over here, and that's what the nautilus has. And then we find eventually in other cephalopods like the squid, we find a fully formed eye, very similar to our own. So that's complexity. There's the evolution of complexity.
Okay, real quickly, the squid eye is more efficient than your eye because it lives where it's dark. If your eye was as efficient as the squid and you looked at the sun, you'd be blinded. So I believe that's designed to be that way. Okay, natural selection. True or false? Imagine you own 2 dogs, one furry, one hairless. You take them to Alaska in the summertime. You come home and your mom goes, "Yo, what's up? Where's the dogs?" "Oh, Mama, I left them in Alaska. Sorry about that." So you left a furry dog and a hairy dog, or a furry dog and a hairless dog in Alaska in the summertime. Imagine they fall in love, get married, and make puppies. What do they make? A mixture, some furry, some hairless. Winter comes. What's going to happen? Well, these are Chihuahuas, so first they're going to say mucho frio. Then they're going to die. When they die, they can no longer reproduce. The furry dogs live. They can dig it. They reproduce. What do they make? Mostly furry dogs. Fancy word is phenotype. They could make a hairless dog. Next winter comes, what's going to happen? Adios. The only type of dog in Alaska surviving would be a furry dog. Suppose you dumped those dogs in a hot, hot desert. What are you going to get eventually? Only the hairless dogs would survive. Does natural selection occur? Yes. Natural selection is 1,000,000,000% true. Is natural selection evidence that dogs have bacterial ancestors? You decide for yourself. I say no. Dogs make dogs. Again, a lot of evolutionists are shocked when I say, of course natural selection is true, but again, you're limited to the changes that you can get among the dogs. They're always going to be a dog. I remember biology. They give me great evidence for natural selection. Then they make the leap that we all have bacterial ancestors. No, this is microevolution. It's 100% true. How many people here have ever bought shoes? I know every female has. That's how God made you. Did you select the shoes or did you create the shoes? What did you do? You selected. Is there a tremendous difference? Yes. What does natural selection do? It selects things that have already been created. If you're not fit for your environment, you're out. You're not going to get new genetic information and survive. So natural selection selects. Natural selection doesn't create anything. The peppered moth example. In England, this isn't, you guys seen this in your biology textbooks, right? It's still in there. When trees used to be light-colored because of the lichen, the biology books teach there used to be a lot of light-colored moths and just a few dark moths. That's because on the tree bark, they said the birds could see the dark moths and eat them. So a lot of light moths, few dark moths. Then evil man polluted the environment. The trees got darker. Now the dark moths blended in and the light moths didn't. The textbooks teach the dark moth population decreased. I'm sorry, the light moth population decreased. The dark moth population increased. This is right out of a current biology textbook, Natural Selection in black and white. Would that example be true in nature? Yes, it's natural selection. But is it evidence for bacteria to blue whale evolution? No, because they are still what? Moths. You started with moths, you ended with moths. Little trivia, the example is a fraud. How many of you have ever seen a moth? I bet you saw it at night and it was scared to death, right? Moths don't sunbathe. They don't like the sun. They don't land on the tree bark during the day. They hide underneath the branches and the leaves. This guy said, Gerald Coyne, 2 moths have been found in such position on a tree bark after 40 years of extensive research. They don't land on the tree bark. This guy, you think your life is dull? Studied moths for 25 years. Why did he? They paid him to. He saw 1 on a tree bark during 25 years. The fact is they glued dead moths to the tree. They put frozen moths on it, and there's references that you guys can look up. Jerry Coyne, what did he do? He said this was the prize horse in their stable for the theory of evolution. It has to be thrown out. He said he felt the same way he did when he found out that Santa Claus wasn't real. That's an exact quote. You can look it up. But I have no problem with the peppered moth example of natural selection. But they are still what? Moths. Is time up? Okay. Oh, didn't talk about mutations. Mutations cause lung cancer. They do not create lungs. Okay, this part is natural selection. Mutations happen. What he was talking about, those flies, the genetic information to make wings was there. If you get a mutation, you can get a wing anywhere. It's just a repetition of the genetic information that already exists. That's what mutations can do. And nobody stands in front of an X-ray machine wanting to get mutated, do we? No. They're harmful and they cause you to lose information. Thank you.
We found more that we agree on. This is good. I mentioned earlier that those of us who study evolutionary biology recognize that there are many evolutionary forces. For me, actually, just to throw this out, some of my students will realize that, where's my undergrads? Is there any undergrads? They will remember me saying this. This is totally amazing to me, all right? You take the diversity of life, you take the people in this room, we analyze them genetically, and we try to explain that diversity, and your instinct is that this is going to be an incredibly complicated problem with dozens and dozens of factors, and this is the beauty of it. No, there's only 5 major evolutionary forces that we need to explain the diversity of life: mutation, natural selection, a process called random drift, which is basically like the founder effect you mentioned earlier is a good example, the movement of genes among separated populations, and then non-random mating patterns. And so this is what we study. 5 minutes, so we'll only talk about the first 2 today, but I don't think we're going to have a lot of controversy here. So step 1, mutation creates heritable variation within breeding populations. Lobsters, these are all different forms of the same species of ladybug. Not all mutations are beneficial, not all are detrimental. In some of the sort of creationist literature, there will be debates about whether or not you can even get beneficial mutations. Aren't all mutations bad? You know, the word mutation or mutant has this very negative connotation outside of science. This is sort of a frequency distribution. So here's a particular experiment where they looked at lots and lots of mutations from one organism. About 20% were lethal. You know, in humans, there are a huge number of spontaneous abortions that happen that are due to lethal mutations. And then after we get rid of the lethal mutations, there are some that have, fitness effects that are negative. So the 0 is way over here. So these, in humans, you can think of mutations that cause a variety of diseases. And then there's a lot of mutations that really don't seem to matter a whole lot for reproduction and survival, except maybe if the environment changes, they might become important. And then there's a small fraction of mutations that are beneficial. The highly detrimental mutations will be eliminated quickly by natural selection. The highly beneficial mutations will increase in frequency, possibly taking over the population over time. Now the population has transitioned from one color to another color, one form to another form, and so forth. Now, I've got my pepper moss slide here. So now I'm going to have to go and read all these papers and find out if indeed this is a fraud. But, oh, not again. That was a divine intervention, perhaps. But we have lots and lots and lots of natural examples of natural selection in the wild. So it's really, that part is not so controversial. There's another argument that comes up in the creation literature about the extreme probability problem. This is the idea that, if you think of all of the things that make you, you, all of the mutations that have to be just right to make you, you, then it's such an exceedingly small number that it has to be impossible, right? There has to be a design. Or this, when you look at the basis for this mathematical argument, it's entirely false. So the first thing to realize is even a very unlikely event will happen if you give enough trials to the problem, right? Somebody wins the lotto, even though you have an infinitesimally small chance of winning it. So anything that's mathematically possible will happen given enough trials. So that's point number one. Point number two is, that's not the way evolution works. This probability of all these random events, they don't have to happen at once. It's a series, and each series builds on the last step. I just thought of this afternoon. It's like this game, right? It's blind man's bluff, right? You're hotter, colder, hotter, right? Natural selection, continually increasing the frequency each step of the way. All these mutations going from point A to point B don't need to happen at once, and we already discussed the fact that in some cases, relatively few mutations can have major effects. And again, this idea that we have to think about our ancestors being bacteria, it's not really the way to think about it. Our ancestors were probably closest living relatives we have are chimpanzees, bonobos. They had fully developed circulatory systems, right? So they were fully functional. And then before them, there were another group of primates that had fully functional circulatory systems. And somewhere you get back where there were some changes. And so, we don't look at the fish and us and try to think about what the common ancestor is. There were all these other steps in the evolutionary series along the way. In the interest of time, I think, this is just a summary of everything I just said. This is another thing that I want to just point out before I end. There is this notion that mutations don't create anything, that mutations only cause bad things to happen, that there's no creation involved. Mutations only degrade populations and degrade species. And that is demonstrably false. We get new colors in the lobsters appear. That's creation. We get new body segments evolved in the other examples I gave. And so maybe in the interest of time, we'll stop there and I'll let you finish up.
Well, I feel we are really bonding. We should go to a Pirates-Padres game because that's the only team our Pirates can beat. Oh, thank you very much. I'm not going to a Dodger game in a Pirate hat, I'll tell you that much. No. But personally, I do like him. He's a great guy, and all of you, no matter what your beliefs, you will learn more from people who disagree with you than agree with you. Become their friends, right? Okay, my question. How do you think life originated? What is your best explanation? I'm not asking if you know, because neither one of us were there. And is your explanation based on scientific observation or hypothesis? So, origin of life.
I'm not going to be able to provide a satisfactory answer to that. This is obviously an area outside my realm of expertise. I know biology, I know evolutionary biology, which deals with diversification of living systems. We have these sort of classic experiments in primordial biochemistry from the 60s, I think, that are in the textbooks. The idea that, if you put all these biological molecules together, you can get more complicated biological molecules evolve. There are a number of hypotheses about how that first cell developed from these primordial soups, so to speak. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I don't think it's a problem in science that we have a definitive answer to right now. I will say there's a lot of very interesting things, though. You can get complicated biological molecules. You can get amino acids formed in abiotic conditions. That happens in nature. We have meteorites filled with amino acids that formed in outer space. And so those original organic molecules, a lot of the complicated molecules, can form in abiotic conditions without any biological interactions. And I think that's pretty well established. How we get from that to the first cell, no, I don't know.
You're way beyond time, so if you want, you can ask your two questions to Bill.
Oh. Do you have another question for me? That was only one.
Okay.
All right, that's right. I got a question. I'll get a question. So I'm very curious I need a definition for kind. I need a definition for where the microevolution, macroevolution cutoff is, That's what I want to know.
Thank you. Well, that question is a trip down memory lane because I remember as a young, eager creationist in like 1989, I called the Institute for Creation Research and I said, where do you think the kinds are? And I remember their answer was at the family level. Now, I believe in ligers. They exist. My daughter gave a lesson on ligers and zorses. Zebras and horses can interbreed. That tells me that they are related to each other. So my level would be at the family level, canine, equine, feline. And you can get a lot of diversity among them and the genetic information. To me, since the lion and tiger can reproduce and make a liger, that shows me that in the past that they were related. They might have had mutations since then to make viable offspring, but to me that shows. So my level of kind is not on the species level by any means, and a lot of creationists make that huge mistake. It's at the family level. And you could argue a Great Dane and a Chihuahua are different species. Well, the genome would be able to reproduce, but the phenotype would not for obviously physical reasons. So you could also argue a supermodel would be a different species than me. Sometimes people will, or animals will not do just based upon how they look, but genetically it would still be possible to have a viable offspring. So my answer to you would be at the family level, and that's a question I had too back in 1989. My question for Andrew is, do you believe we have a distant relative that is bacteria? And why do you believe that? Is it based upon observation, or is it based upon hypothesis that humans in our distant past do have bacterial ancestors, as do whales and redwood trees and penguins? Why do you believe that? Is it based on science?
So it's pretty clear, and we agree, that microevolution happens. We have evolution within species. It's clear that speciation happens. It's clear that you can get closely related species up to some level, family, although if we went into sort of humans, apes, we might, I would presume, change, probably wouldn't be family level, right? Okay. So I don't see anywhere in this continuum of evolution where there's an obvious cutoff. So yes, I think you go back far enough, life has a single origin. I think it's got to be, something bacterial, unless there were something crazy like two origins and some other weird genome arrived on Earth from Mars, which I don't think happened. So, when we look at the diversity of life, you can see this transition from species to species in the fossil record, in the living organisms. When you look at them morphologically, when you look at them genetically, we all share a common genetic code. We can generate a phylogeny, a tree of life, based on these genes. The evidence is all there. It would be very, for me, strange to come up with some alternative hypothesis that life was created in such a way that all of the genetic code would somehow parallel, this evolutionary history, this phylogeny, unless it was purposely put there to fool us or something. You know what I'm saying? And it's not just the kinds of genes that we find in different organisms, because the genetic code is redundant. There are different ways to make a particular amino acid, and when you look at closely related species, even though there might be 2 or 3 ways to make it, they'll all make it the same way at a particular base pair position in the genome. And when you get more distantly, then those different ways of making that amino acid start changing. And when you analyze this, there's a tree of life. It all fits. I don't even know if I answered the question. Did I answer the question? Yes. Yes. Yes, I believe we have a bacterial common ancestor. All of life does if we go back far enough. I need one more question for you. So this common thing. So what is an example from a creation standpoint of a falsifiable hypothesis, something that's specific to creationism, a falsifiable hypothesis, something that's distinct from the things that we would look at in evolutionary biology?
Good question. Falsifiable hypothesis would be matter and energy from nothing, life from non-life, evidence of bacteria producing something other than bacteria, people producing something other than people. There's 6 billion humans on the planet. Every one of them is evidence for creation. Bacteria can reproduce, my understanding is, within 20 minutes. They've been studying it for many, many, many decades. All they're cranking out is bacteria. So there's a lot of observational evidence that would falsify creation. This might sound sophomoric, but it's not. I would like to see half a leg, half a wing, half a scale, half a feather. I'd like to see how a respiratory system changes from a bellows to the multi-pass system, how the bird's back feet became perching feet. There's zero evidence for this. There's trillions of animals alive today, trillions of fossils, and they're all showing stasis, static. They're not changing into anything else or from anything else. So fossils would do it for me. Living evidence, the physics of thermodynamics would do it for me, and the law of biogenesis would falsify the creation idea.
I'm going to ask a few questions for Bill here, the people who have asked questions of Bill. Bob is going to ask a few questions. They are going to have 2 minutes to respond, whoever you've addressed it to. The opponent is going to have 1 minute to rebut. So we're not going to be able to get to everybody's questions here, but we're going to try to post them with answers that, if they're able to get to it at the what is it called? CreationSD.org. At creationsd.org. Okay? So if you don't hear your question, take a look at that website and we'll see if we can get an answer to your question. The first question is for Bill. What do you think about the fact that we have the same genetic code, amino acid code, and several proteins in common with bacteria? Is that evidence for a common ancestor, and why?
Good question. It's always good to separate data from interpretation of data. We do have a lot in similar in the genetic code. Those guys don't even have a nucleus, though, so that can make you feel better. But anyways, DNA similarities, hopefully this will answer. We do have a lot in common with bacteria, insects, fish, apes, and humans. They're all made of cells. Only some of us reproduce by meiosis. Only some of us are vertebrate. You can see it's getting less and less. Some of us have 4 limbs, so we have more in common with reptiles and apes than we do with fish and insects. Only us and apes on this list give birth to live young, but we're the only ones who can do open heart surgery and drive-by shootings, okay? I was talking to an ape, and he said, I don't want to be related to you guys. But anyways. All right. We do have more in common with ape than anything else. To me, I think you would predict that we would have more in common genetically. You eat bananas, they eat bananas. You need proteins to digest the banana, so to me, it shows that there is a designer who gave the same protein for us to be able to do these functions. Now, the data is we have more similar with an ape than we do an insect or bacteria. My interpretation of the data is still the differences are enormous. So let's suppose we're 5% different than ape. Actually, they just did an ENCODE project. It was published in 2009 where they traced the Y chromosome of apes, and the similarity is only 70%. That's a recent study in the ENCODE project. But we have 3.2 billion base pairs, a 5% difference. It's 160 million differences. It's not like one mutation away. We have more in common with ape. The differences still are astronomical. My interpretation is we are not related. And also, chimps have 48 chromosomes. We have 46. That's a significant difference as well. Once again, to me, the data shows the differences are enormous and that we are not related.
So what was the question again? It's about common genetic...
Let me repeat it real quick. What do you think about the fact that we have the same genetic code, amino acid code, and several proteins in common with bacteria? Is that evidence for a common ancestor, and why?
Life shares a lot of commonality. We all have common enzyme systems. We all have common things we have to do. For example, some of us all have to digest bananas. That's absolutely true. But when you look at the details, when you get into the DNA, even though there might be many, many, many different ways of building a particular enzyme, we share more similarities with organisms that we are closely related to than those that are more distant related, even though they all perform the same function. We can go to sections of DNA that don't do anything. There are large sections of DNA that have absolutely no known function that seem to be evolving off in their own direction because there's been a duplication event of some gene, and then over time that duplicate just isn't important. It loses function. It starts accumulating random mutations. In these random mutations, these areas of the genome that don't have any function at all, we are more similar to closely related species than we are to distantly related species. It's very hard to think of why a creator would take sections of DNA that don't do anything and then build similarities into species that we perceive to be closely related and then not in more distantly related species. It's this whole other series of assumptions that I just can't wrap my mind around. Anyway.
Stay up because he's going to have the next question for you. So.
Andrew, given that biological evolution is completely dependent upon there being a pre-existing material universe, where do you think it came from? Please do not stop with the Big Bang. Go all the way back to where you think everything came from.
So the question, as I understand it, is what is before the Big Bang? Is that the question?
It sounds like where did the material universe come from? And then want to
Man, now see, again, astrophysics. What do I know about astrophysics? So, okay, so you follow, again, there's not like a Big Bang theory, as I understand it. The theoretical physicists have different models of the universe. They follow them back mathematically to this point where everything was condensed into this infinitesimally small space and time stops or something like that, and that's, the start of everything. I'm not an astrophysicist. I don't have any ability to comment on those models. I generally believe that the physicists are probably doing a good job at tracing back what happened. The universe is expanding. It had to start from somewhere. To get to this point and say, well, what about before? What happened before then? I don't know. I mean, to me, we're getting perhaps outside of science. We're now into some other realm, possibly religion. There's an argument that some have made that the physical constants of the universe, and again, I don't know if this is true or not because I'm not a physicist, that the physical constants of the universe are just right for us to be here, that if they weren't just right, then this universe as it exists this universe wouldn't exist. I don't know. I mean, is that evidence for a creator to set everything up, to set it in motion at the beginning, to set the rules of physics and mathematics in place to get us where we are today? I think that's fine. I think it's completely compatible with, my religious belief and a lot of others. So, no, I have no idea what happened before the Big Bang.
Yes, earlier we talked about idea, observation, conclusion. My conclusion is based upon observation, which is the first law of thermodynamics. Many people have the idea that there had to be a natural origin to the universe. By no means am I saying it's Andrew's position, but many people don't like the idea that there's a supernatural, so they say, well, there must be a natural explanation to the origin of the universe. Then I say, well, the first law of thermodynamics falsifies your belief. If they were open to the observational evidence, they would reject the idea that there is a natural origin. You follow me? So ask yourself, are you following the evidence or are you following the hypothesis? The evidence teaches us, one of the strongest reasons to believe in a supernatural God is the first law of thermodynamics. Matter and energy do not come from nothing. You don't get matter for free. You don't get energy for free. I saw your gas prices down here, $4.30 a gallon. All this matter and energy in the universe did not poof from nothing by natural means. I was once at Huntington Beach High School, and this girl said, so you believe God just poofed everything into existence? And I thought about it. I said, yes, I do agree with that. Really, the debate could be, which poof do you believe in? Do you believe in a poof from an incredibly powerful, great, eternal God that we really can't comprehend, or that it came from nothing? I think it takes less idea to believe in the poof that we are not the smartest entity in the universe, that there is a God greater than us who can create matter, energy, order, life, etc.
Okay, this question is for Bill. Please explain the existence of vestigial organs such as the appendix without using the phrase, those organs probably have important functions we have yet to discover.
Never thought of that one. No, I'm just having fun. Vestigial organs is an argument you don't hear too much anymore from evolutionists. Now, evolutionists would say, hey, there's vestigial organs, things that are not functional. We don't need them anymore because of our evolutionary history. In 1895, this guy with a long German name said the human body had 86 vestigial organs. Hey, there's 86 things in the body that we don't need. Here's what he listed: tonsils, appendix, thymus, coccyx, pineal gland. You think you need a pineal gland? That's your clock. That's what tells you when to eat, when to wake up. Pituitary gland, pancreas, spleen. The lymph system was listed as vestigial because they didn't know what it was in 1895. Now the list is 0. You don't need your left arm to survive. Are you better off with it? Yes, it's not vestigial. Can you live without your tonsils? Yes, it's not vestigial. You're better off with it. The appendix, it can kill you. Okay? Well, it's full of lymphocytes, and it's located at the end of your sewer, okay, where you have most germs in your body. You are better off with an appendix than without it. So, well, sometimes people will say, well, cavefish, they lose their eyes. Like, that's vestigial. Losing vision is not the theory of evolution. Getting vision is. Well, in my opinion, and it's always good to listen to people say, what do you think is a vestigial organ? And I'll be happy to research it. That's how you learn. So if anyone thinks there's a vestigial organ in the human body, I'm more than eager to listen to what you think it is, and I'll look it up. But the appendix is functional. Duke University just had a huge article bestowing that same fact, and I agree with them that there are no vestigial organs in the human body. There might be things we don't understand yet, but I don't know what they would be, and I don't believe them to be vestigial.
So, sorry. Just have a few comments. First, loss of function is evolution. So if we have some fish that happens to speciate into a cavefish species that loses its sight over time, that is evolution. So that's a misnomer, I guess. I think you said the vestigial organs all have functions. I mean, I think that was your conclusion.
I don't think we have vestigial organs. What they used to think was vestigial, man has figured out
All right.
what their purpose is.
Okay, so I would disagree. I think over time there are organs that lose their function, that change function. The way evolution works is you've got a toolbox to get you from point A to point B. That toolbox is these genetic systems and developmental systems for building a complex organism. There's only so many things you can do. Bill had the image of the car up there before. You know, if you take a car and tinker with it, you only have certain parts to work with in order to build a different car. And that's how evolution works. So if you're going to change that car, there are going to be parts of it that don't function in the same way. There might be parts of it that no longer have any function at all and eventually are lost over time. That's the definition of vestigial organ. So I think we'll disagree on that because I think your answer was actually whatever the question said, that vestigial organs don't have functions, some of which we don't know about yet. But I guess we'll disagree on that one.
Andrew, have scientists been able to link amino acids into proteins?
Have scientists been able to link amino acids into proteins in laboratory? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's not something I've done personally, but.
Okay. The origin of life people have a lot of problems. One of them is, where did life not originate? Many people think that the first molecules were amino acids. They formed chains, made proteins, and over millions of years became a cell. Well, first, even if you make an amino acid, you're not making life. Not even close. Even if it makes a protein, you're not making life. I could hand them a dead dog. It's got all the proteins, all the amino acids, all the RNA, all the DNA. bring it to life. You see, there's more to life than chemistry, biology, and physics. The second you die, you might have the exact same chemistry, but you're dead. But anyways, talk about this real quick. Amino acids form peptide bonds to make a protein. Where did life not originate? Life did not originate by natural means in the water because water breaks up peptide bonds. Life did not originate where there's oxygen. Oxygen breaks up peptide bonds. And life did not originate where there's sunlight because ultraviolet light breaks up peptide bonds. So I like to read evolutionary articles, and they say life originated in an oxygen-free environment underneath the bottom of a rock that was dry. Now, why do they come up with that? Because they know where peptide bonds cannot form. I believe they're reaching for it, but even if you do have a protein, it's not life. It's only a protein, okay? So.
We're going to have enough time for about one more question each for both of you. And whoever wrote this question, I'm going to do my best not to botch this one, but I apologize ahead of time if I do. So this one's for Bill. Bill, if transposable elements such as endogenous retroviruses were shown to be genomic insertions and the reuse of insertion points was shown to be less than 1%, would you regard the observation that humans and chimpanzees have more than 95% of their tens of thousands of elements as compelling evidence for common ancestry of the two?
No. But I got a slide on it, okay? I truly, truly like, and I'm not doing this, I like to read what evolutionists believe. I like to talk to them, and a retrovirus is an argument that people use. What they do is this, and I might, if I'm getting it wrong, I apologize. You know, I'm an engineer, but I'm doing my best. They look at the genome and they say, hey, once again, data from interpretation of data. They look at the genome and say, hey, there's a mutation here on the certain part of the genome of humans. Hey, there's a mutation here on the genome part of a chimp at the same spot. That's the data. The interpretation of the data can go two ways. The evolutionists could say, hey, that proves that we're related to each other and that this mutation was passed down to humans. That's one way to interpret it, but there's another way to interpret it, that the genome at certain sites is predisposed to getting a virus at that location. You follow me? So the data shows mutation on the same part of the genome. Some people say it's proof that we have ape-like ancestors. Other people say no. That site is receptive to that virus. And that's what my interpretation of the data would be, that we both have the same virus because of the site is receptive towards it. Okay?
I gotta look that question over. That was a very detailed question.
I better just let you read it.
Yes. Genomic insertions and the reuse of insertion points. This is insertion must be less than 1%. Chimpanzees are more than 95%. I'm not even sure how to answer this. I have to be quite honest. I'm trying to take this question apart. Yes, so we do have these things called transposable elements, originally called, jumping genes. We have viruses that move DNA around from organism to organism, sometimes crossing species lines, sometimes crossing kingdom lines. There's all sorts of evidence for that. And I'm not sure how this relates to common ancestry. I'm sorry, whoever's question this is, I'm working with this, but Bill, can you help me? I'm trying to find the relevance of this for the creation evolution debate, and I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it here in this question.
And your last question, how did life come from non-life? I guess that's the law of biogenesis.
Yeah, life from non-life. So again, evolution, What we study is the diversification of life. This origin of life problem is outside my expertise, so I'm not going to get up here as like a scientist with air quotes around it and be able to answer that. The law of biogenesis, this sort of thing that's in the textbooks, that life only comes from life, that really was not designed to address the origin of life problem. The law of biogenesis is really focused on complex life forms, right? You get one complex life form giving rise to another complex life form. The whole biochemistry of the origin of life, the origin of complex biochemicals, how that first cell formed, that's a whole separate problem. I think it falls completely outside this law of biogenesis as it was established in the 1600s or whatever it is. It's sort of an antiquated concept that I don't think is. We don't really think of that in biology as a law the way that we do for a lot of other things. Anyway, I'll let you answer.
Well, I used to work on nuclear submarines, and if you ask my dad, I designed the whole thing, but I did not. But he talked about complex life forms. To me, they're all complex. The simplest bacteria is 100 trillion times more complex than a nuclear submarine, okay? Now, I briefly touched on it in my introduction. Think of the details. Suppose a bunch of gases and chemicals and matter mixed together and you've got a living organism. And it's saying, I'm alive, and it's real happy. It's got to be able to do a lot of things in order for the theory of evolution to be true. It can't just become alive from non-living matter, which violates the law of biogenesis. It has to stay alive. It has to be able to metabolize. You call it eating. Plants call it photosynthesis. Is that a very complex function? Yes, even in bacteria, it's enormously complex for them to metabolize. Then it's got to be able to reproduce. Is that complex? Extremely complex. So even if it violated law of science to become alive, it's got to be able to metabolize, reproduce, and then endure trillions upon trillions upon trillions of mutations. Earlier, he talked about blind man's bluff. Well, in real life, if you don't do it right, you're dead. You don't get a mulligan in life, right? You don't get it right, you're dead. The statistical chances of wiping out through mutation is much stronger than bacteria mutating into a blue whale. Okay.
Okay, we're at the conclusions right now, but you're first.
Okay. Let's see, 6:53. Okay, ready? Well, first, thanks for coming. And thank you, Andrew. I appreciate we did bond. Here's a closing statement. Creationists believe eyes, hearts, brains, lungs, livers, kidneys, whales, bald eagles, everything living is a result of design, not chance. We believe matter and energy do not originate from nothing by natural means. These are not religious beliefs. I believe them to be scientific beliefs. Life only comes from life. Bacteria makes bacteria. Apes make apes. People make people. Suppose I was a tour guide. I had 100 million smart Chinese people with me, but they never knew anything about Mount Rushmore. And I pointed to it and I said, that got there over billions of years of time, nature, and chance. I'm willing to think not too many of them would believe me. They'd look at that and say, no, that's way too complex. And I could lose my job as a tour guide. So I get another job. Well, first I'm glad I have that slide up there. They have no bias to the origins of a stone face on the side of Mount Rushmore. They'd say there's no way that could have happened by chance. Somebody designed that. So suppose I lose my job. I'm teaching anatomy at UCLA. And I'm teaching the class, your human eye with the muscles, the blood vessels, the retina, the cornea, the optic nerve is the result of millions and millions of years of beneficial mutation and natural selection. Chance. How long would I keep my job at UCLA? Forever. The reason? I think there's a bias against design. A tour guide loses his job for teaching that, but I feel the eye is infinitely more complex than anything on Mount Rushmore. What should be taught in the science class? Science. How's that sound? When it comes to they could talk forever about how the eye works. Then they could say, okay, new chapter. Now we're going to discuss the origins of the eye. Okay, that's history more than science, but it's still very important. The science talks about how the eye works, then you can talk about the origins. I feel a supernatural designer is a much better explanation. Now, I am not labeling anybody in this room, But I've talked to many atheists and evolutionists over the years, and I have never really met one who said, you know, Bill, it makes sense to me that 60,000 miles of blood vessels happen by chance. I like to befriend these people. I've befriended many professors, and there's different reasons where they reach their conclusion. I think it's because of a bias. And again, there's many reasons. I'm not labeling anyone. The hardcore people who really want to sue you, if you even think about talking about design, I've befriended them. Bitterness due to suffering and pain and grief. It's like, God, where were you when I needed you? And their whole life is fighting God, and I know that's not Andrew. This was me. When did I become an evolutionist? At 14. At 14, the active hormones kicked in. I had this Bible here, and I'm being honest. I had this Bible here telling me what to do. My flesh doesn't want to do that. I was wavering. I got taught the theory of evolution. I said, hallelujah, brother, amen. I'm not listening to those rules in the Bible anymore. I'm going to do what I want. So I'm only pointing the finger at me on that one. Pride. We want to be the boss, right? I like to say the problem is that God has the remote control, right? We want the remote control. We want to be bosses, so some people just discount that God does not exist. Peer pressure. You could lose your job, your career, if you even question the theory of evolution, and that's not academic inquiry at all. This one breaks my heart. The only thing they've been taught. Why wouldn't I be an evolutionist until I was 26? I never heard a counter theory to it. And when I did, I dove into it and felt that I had not been taught both sides, which is truth. Anti-religion. We learned about religion in high school. We learned about the Crusades and burning witches, the Inquisition, etc. I don't want anything to do with that. Once again, I hope you're not religious. I hope you're a seeker of truth. And apathy. A lot of people don't care. They care about their career, which is important, their family, etc. They're not thinking about God. They're just thinking about their world here. Well, I'm going to like to share with you why this is important. That's a picture of my daughter. Guess how old she was? 2. Very good. That's her when she was 3. She got leukemia. We went to Chalk Hospital for 6 months. We saw 12 kids who died. I went to 6 funerals. I saw a casket of a tiny little pink casket. I saw a baby girl who skin turned dark blue because her blood couldn't carry oxygen. I heard kids screaming in pain all night. I was mad at God. I could never, though, be an atheist. When I was worried about my daughter dying, I saw precious kids dying. Although I was emotionally mad at God, I could never be an atheist. 60,000 miles of blood vessels, 100 billion miles of DNA. I'd say, help me through these times because I'm pretty mad at you. November 23rd, 2001, she gets a fungus on her lungs with no immune system. I was outraged at God. I was furious. But a big thing happened that can change your life. I was so mad at God, this is what I did. I said, you know what? You're in charge. You made everything. You made the universe. You made my daughter. If she dies, that's up to you. If she lives, that's up to you. We're going to do everything we can with science, medicine, technology, research, and prayer. But if she dies, what? That's up to you. Why is creation important? It can make you thankful for what you have. Look at your hands, everybody. Did you earn them? These are gifts. You ever said thanks for these gifts? Creation can make you humble. That's where we should be. She's sick. You all have problems in life. You're in charge. May your will be done with the problem. And with thankfulness and humility, you can have the secret to life. Peace. Happiness is not the secret to life. You can never be happy unless you have peace. When your head hits the pillow, if you don't have peace, you can't be happy. Creation can make you thankful, humble, which leads to peace. And that's what truth can do for you. My daughter survived. She's the big one. She's 6 foot tall, 13 years old. Yes, she plays basketball and volleyball. But if she died, I should still be here saying, what a great creator we have, right? But many people fall away because of the trials you're all going to meet in life. Creation can keep your faith strong. Question when it comes to creation evolution. Are you going to believe an idea or are you going to believe your eyes? The end. Thank you.
I'm going to end with just 4 slides. I want to go back to this because this idea of whales, the bacteria to whales keeps coming up again and again. And so I feel like I need to emphasize this one more time before we wrap up tonight. Bacteria do not evolve directly into whales. Bacteria evolve into multicellular but relatively simple forms of life. We have lots of evidence in some of the early protists for the evolution from single cells to multicellularity. And from there, we go through various stages, eventually getting through fishes, amphibians, cats, mammals, your second cousins, and so forth. Although through all these different stages, it's not a linear phase. It's, the complexity of life evolves step by step from the last common ancestor. It doesn't evolve all at once. It's not an irreducibly complex problem. So that's point one. Point two, the laws of thermodynamics, the origin of the universe, these issues come up. This really is peripheral to the central issue of evolutionary biology. The origin of life, again, that's an issue for astrophysics, right? It really has nothing to do with the reality of biological evolution. The origin of life is an interesting problem. I don't think we have all the answers. I feel reasonably confident that at some point we'll experimentally be able to come up with an extremely plausible model that everybody will believe, but we don't have it yet. But again, that has nothing to do with the evolution of biological diversity after that original point. So that's the first thing I wanted to emphasize. Second, there are lots of ways that we can get complexity without a designer. Okay, so here is a design. It's a regular geometric design. Obviously, someone made this. We look at cracks in mud. We look at cooling lava patterns. We see complex geometric designs, some of them very regular, that did not require a designer per se. We started off with the stones on the sidewalk, right? If I go to a river, there's going to be a gradation from small stones to large stones depending on the flow. That's order. That's complexity. They're there in order from small to large, depending on the flow, depending on how often this bank floods. That's not disorder. That's a natural process producing order in the way that these stones are arranged by size. Crystals, this is order from a non-biological process. So by itself, complexity doesn't require a designer. That is the second thing I want to emphasize. The third, I just have to keep coming back to this. We have so many examples of transitional fossils. We have so many examples of transitional forms within living species. We have so many examples from genetics and developmental biology of how we can move step to step throughout this evolutionary process. Again, these are a few of the ones I used. An interesting thing when we talked about the evolution of kind, if we were going to say that families were created by God, and then within families or some equivalent group of animals, evolution occurred, even within this group of animals, the mollusks, we see evolution of an eye, step by step. There's a plausible theoretical model, and we see all of the intermediate stages represented in living organisms. Speciation, again, within the fossil record, one thing we do agree on that not all creationists do, in some cases documented for certain species in great detail throughout evolutionary transitions, and we see evidence for speciation within living organisms. But, I have to come back to this diagram again. So here we are at the end, and it's really not a scientific debate. It's a philosophical issue. If you believe literally in the truth of Genesis, and I assume we're talking about Genesis 1, because as those of you who are Bible scholars know, the story in Genesis 1 and the story in Genesis 2 don't quite add up. So I assume we're talking about Genesis 1. Then there's nothing that I'm going to, it's not really a debate, right? There's nothing I'm going to say here that's going to change your mind. There's no evidence that anyone's going to present if you accept that as being true, and that's fine. But it's really a philosophical issue. It's not a scientific issue. There's no evidence that anyone will present to shake your faith. But again, for myself, for most of us who are scientists, the idea that religion and science occupy complementary areas of knowledge. They complement one another. They're not competing in any way. They're explaining different things about truth with a capital T is what we generally believe in. So.